but then I woke up and it was just like more and more things coming up as I'm looking. And then it was, just lots of things coming very, very fast. And I was then also like, oh, I feel really sad, like just a sadness. And it was like, oh, similar sort of thing. It's like, oh, maybe how am I meant to function? Like, how am I meant to live my life being sad, looking at these things, and then also being happy and like enjoying my life? Because it's like, well, actually, my life's like amazing, but I feel sad, and I feel sad that I'm sad. And then it's like, so like same thing that you said. It's like, oh, can I do a call today? Like can we have a conversation? I'm like, well, of course we can have a conversation. Like it's the thinking, in what state is a good state to have a conversation, or what's useful for the conversation, or where that conversation is going to go. That then makes you, oh, I'm not in the right headspace, so I need some time for me. And it's like, but then it was like, I was then washing the pots, and I was like saying like a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I was just, I don't know, it was almost like I was just, oh, okay, well, you don't have to do this all the time. Like, you don't have to keep looking all the time. And it wasn't like I went, oh, stop. It was just almost like a pause, or not even a pause, but it's just, you can get on with your life whilst you might be processing stuff, but you don't necessarily have to always be looking at it, always be thinking about it. But it's also that thing of, as we've said many times before, it's like zoom out. And it's just because I'm going like I wrote down, it's like, I don't want to be sad. And it's like, well, you don't want to be sad because you think it's a big problem, because maybe you can't see the bigger picture type thing. And it's like, just yeah.
I don't know if this helps, but can we talk about that for a bit?
Yeah.
Because
I thought we might.
because I don't know if it changes it or reframes it for you, but for me, there's a difference between I feel sad or I'm sad and like I'm experiencing sadness.
What I thought you was going to say was, there's a difference between like feeling sad and processing sad experiences, emotions from the past, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. So did you hear what I actually said?
No, I was like,
yeah, you already went to your own interpretation.
Say it again.
Should we try it again?
Yeah, take two. Go.
You're lucky I can remember it. See if there's a difference in how it feels for you between I feel sad, or I am sad, or I'm experiencing sadness.
I feel sad is more like a much like sadder thing, like, because it's actually feeling it like in my body. Whereas like I am sad, I'm experiencing sadness is almost like a thought, like, oh yeah, I can see how that would make me sad, and it's sad that I'm sad. It's like being sad that I'm sad.
Yeah, the sadness is actually this that you experience. So this is how it feels to me anyway, just, and correct me always, but like when it's me, if it's like I feel sad, then there's sadness on that because I don't want to feel sad. It's like I feel sorry for myself for feeling sad.
Yeah.
Then that's where there's a youngness to that. There's like like, oh, I just want to comfort myself, and I just want to cuddle, and you can feel that's how that feels. Then there's like, I am sad, which feels very much like ownership, but like a defining characteristic of oneself. So I don't necessarily like that one either. because it feels like for me, I'm kind of labeling myself as that thing. So like I am sad kind of has a slight more permanence to it, even though it doesn't really, but like there's something in the language of that. Whereas if I'm able to go, I'm currently experiencing sadness, for me, that allows just enough detachment from it that I can then actually allow myself to experience sadness as a sensation or an energy that's moving through my body. That's not, that I don't then have to feel sorry for or create a narrative around.
Yeah, it's the same thing as that. Like I've seen the video about clouds being thoughts that come and go sort of thing. It's that same sort of, like, as you say, it's at some point feeling sad I've attached certain things to it, like that you shouldn't feel that, or that it's bad, or that it's not safe to feel that, and so I then like add meaning on top of the experience of it. Whereas it's like there's other ones where it's like, if I'm feeling happy, it's like, yay, yeah. let's do that. I want more of that. Whereas, as you say, it's just energy, experiences, stuff that you're experiencing. It's amazing how similar it is to the thought stuff, but I've never done the version of the feelings, which seems kind of odd now that I think about it. But anyway,
it's not that odd though, but it's the bit I think, well, from my experience so far, most people start with the thought stuff. That's been more prevalent in kind of self-help world. The body stuff is only now starting to get bigger. Like you're seeing now the spread of somatics and like somatic space therapies, the tapping stuff, all the different things that actually are including the body a lot more. Whereas up until, I don't know when exactly, but let's just say 3 to 5 years ago, a lot of the self-help stuff was based purely on psychology, which is obviously only about the mind. So it actually makes sense. And I think in the Western world, as a mind dominant society, it makes sense that most of us would go through that way first. And actually, if you jumped straight to the body, I don't know that you could. Like
I've thought that it's like, actually, it's almost like, for me anyway, my experience is that I needed to do the mind-based stuff so that I could become aware of like just what the hell was going on.
Yeah.
Because if I wasn't aware and conscious and able to deal with, like, mentally deal with discomfort and like thoughts coming up, then if I was then feeling it, I couldn't then maybe understand or process or explore it, because it'd just be like, what the hell's going on? It's too scary. I'll go like work for 17 hours so that I don't have to feel anything or think anything, type thing. So it's like, yeah, for me, I had that thought the other day that it's like, yeah, that I needed to do it in that order so that now I'm more able to understand, explore, process the feeling side of it. And I think that's the thing. It's like I said the other day, I wrote a post-it note like, it's this one. I thought I was done with all this inner stuff, or I thought I was done with all this inner work stuff. Yeah, like, not that I didn't think that was true, because I always knew that it was like a lifelong journey. But it's like you go, well, lifelong journey, but like not to the same extent, or like, and then it's like, oh, feelings. It's like, well, you've done the thought stuff. Now you got that same thing, but with feelings. Like, oh, really? Really?
Well, and that's another thing you can interrupt, because it's like how heavy and perhaps difficult it felt with the thought stuff. It doesn't have to be or feel the same, and it doesn't have to be as long. It doesn't. Do you see what I'm like? I just think it's worth interruption there on the like narrative of, oh, well, like so far it's been really hard and there was a lot of stuff coming up already. How could I possibly have more? It's like, well, you might have, but also now that you've done the thought stuff, the attachment to things when they come up will be less, so you won't actually necessarily need as long, or it won't be as arduous, or it will still possibly, it'll be what it needs to be, but it's yeah,
and I think that's where it's like, again, it's the meaning you're adding to it, isn't it? It's like, and the perspective as well.
Well, because there's a slight tinge, and I don't know if this is true, but like I'm picking up that there's a little bit of like sadness, disappointment, or something similar to the, like there's a piece where it's really easy to make ourselves wrong, or be like, you haven't done enough, and therefore there's still something wrong with me.
Well, that's the post that I did yesterday, was you don't need to be perfect to be loved. I think that's kind of the whole, like, part of that it's like, oh yeah, I did it wrong, or I haven't done enough, or I'm not good enough, or it's like, oh, I thought I was a B plus and going on to be an A type thing, and actually you're a C/D, kind of like, if you're grading it type thing, like.
Well, that's what your brain's doing, but that
Yeah.
you also know that that's not true.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's where it's the, like, in the moments of like, I don't know, wallowing victim type mentality. It's like, it's like, oh, I thought I'd done enough. Oh, like, but then it's like zooming out. Again, it's that when I zoom out with perspective, it's like, oh, actually, this is all really helpful stuff, and actually it's going to help me in ways that I can't even imagine, sort of thing. Not because I know that to necessarily be true, but because I'm being moved to look. And that's where it's like, I'm not doing it to try and necessarily fix anything. It's more just because stuff is coming up, and having done thought-based stuff in the same way, it's like, oh, when stuff comes up, I have the choice whether to look at it or not. And it's like, that's fine, but you decide. But then I do, not most of the time, but when I look, and it's like, well, okay, cool. Well, I'm choosing to look, sort of thing. And it's, I think that's the thing. It's not necessarily always easy, comfortable. Like, even though you're choosing it, it's like, oh, well, you chose it. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean it's always going to be easy or comfortable and stuff. So, yeah.
And I think there's an extra element to it as well, where, for example, you experiencing sadness this morning, like, and I know this feels particularly annoying when someone says it to you when you're the one experiencing something. So I preload that at the front, right?
Okay, I'm ready. Hit me.
But there is an argument that, like, if you can allow yourself to experience sadness, not allow myself to feel sad, that's not necessarily quite the same thing, which I'll loop back to that, and if I don't, please remind me. But it's like, if I can allow myself to experience the sadness in my body, it will let go of you sooner. And so, and it's only actually coming up because if you bear in mind, no, well, yes and no, because it's actually only coming up because you're ready to feel it.
Okay, yeah.
Because if you bear in mind that only yesterday you were saying to me that, like, you had numbness, you didn't really feel much, and then the sadness did come.
Yeah.
The fact that the sadness is there again means you're not numb.
And it's one of those where, like, yesterday I was like, well, I can't really remember much when I look back, and then it was like all started flowing last night, this morning, and it's like, oh. And again, it's that thing of, if I wasn't on some level ready to look, I'd block it.
Yeah,
I get the sense.
Yeah.
Type thing. There was something you said about the said something about the
experience. Oh, to loop back to.
Yeah, go for that, because there's some. It wasn't that, but yeah, go loop back to the, because I think that's going to help me. What I was showing, the experience of sadness.
Yes. So the experience of sadness versus feel sad. So like leaning into the experience of sadness that's where if you can do it from a like physical sensation perspective, it takes off the extra layer of sadness about feeling that, which is basically sympathy for yourself, that you feel sad.
Yeah.
So for example, what I mean by because this is a really good point, because this is where this is why it's annoying, is because there's loads of people out there who are like, feel your feelings, and like, yeah, but feel them, but don't feel it like with a label. And you're like, what the fuck does that look like? Tell me what to do. Sorry, swearing.
Fire away.
But I think what I mean by that, or the way that I find helpful, or ways that I find helpful, is to tune into the physical sensation. So, for example, what I mean by that is, well, maybe we can try doing it with you, and then if it's not there right now, I'll just do an example. Is that okay?
Yeah, not right now though. I
don't do it with you.
No.
Okay, fine. I'll do it then on myself.
Okay.
So I'm not going to actually go into it. I just wanted to see if I wanted to ask a couple of questions. Can we try it, and then you can say stop?
Yeah.
So if you were to like, is the sadness present now?
Not really.
Okay. Well, then we'll leave it. Not really, because I don't want to go there. That's fine. Okay, so let me give an example.
Yeah.
It would be like, if I were to
the sadness, I think, is in the middle of my chest.
Great, that was going to be my question. Yeah, so it's like,
that's a great example of the whole thing of like, you will block what you don't want to feel, and then it's that thing of you talking about yesterday, of that moment of like courage, or that moment where you can be like, I am feeling it, but I don't really want to share it because it's quite uncomfortable, and I don't know what it's going to bring up.
Yeah. Well, it's quite present. It's not. I know. So this is the way to, like, the way in, and so I do just want to, but you can say stop at any point. Okay, so it's the question of, when you're experiencing an emotion, it's what our brain does is, the brain is really lazy, so it runs on habits. And I know you know this, but you know, for the sake of sharing, and it's also helpful for me to just hear myself say it. Is the brain's lazy, so it creates loops and patterns that it then just runs over and over again. So the brain detects something in the body, or the body sends a signal to the brain, both hand, and the brain goes, oh, I know what to do with that. That's called sadness.
Yeah.
And now I can go run the sadness, I'm feeling sad program, which looks like, for me, for example, looks like comfort food, film, blanket, isolation, shut everyone off till I feel better. It knows how to do that. What we're doing instead to experience sadness is looking for physical sensation. And so the first place to go is like, okay, I'm feeling sadness. In fact, I think the first thing is that reframe from like, I'm sad, to like, okay, where is the sadness in my body? Where am I experiencing sadness? And it's like, you just try and this is just the way that I do it, so it might be different for every single person, but there's a point where you can just sit and you kind of just imagine your body being open. And it's like, okay, if I were experiencing sadness right now, where does it feel like it is? And then just the first place you're drawn is often the place. And if you're someone who doesn't have that, because there definitely are people who don't have a kind of draw to somewhere, it might be that actually you then do a body scan So you can be like, okay, is it in my head? Let me notice, like, go through your body, and then you go, oh, well, this place felt a bit different actually than the rest of it. And that's usually a good place to start. So for you, you've just said you experience it in your chest.
And I think that's the thing that what I was going to say, I knew it would remind me, is that it's like I'm starting to learn. It's like learning how to experience feelings in that way, not in the. And I love the way you described it of like, oh, my brain has identified a signal from the body that it's feeling sad or experiencing sadness or something. We know what to do with that. Upload the sadness remix,
Yeah.
kind of circa 1990 whatever, and kind of play that on loop, which is what your thing of. I know you've mentioned to me that it's like, well, we repeat the patterns from our childhood, and that's what it's doing. It's not loading up that and then another program which like you've learned later on in life, which might be more helpful or something like that. It's going back to the early one, and it's like that's the program that needs to be explored and looked at. Like, but that it's almost like the first thing for me to do is like with anxiety, I was always like, oh, anxiety, I'm feeling anxious, I need to do XYZ strategies, coping mechanism, I know how to deal with anxiety. And then it's like, actually, what if anxiety can just be, it can be an experience that I can feel anxious, but not necessarily default to, well, I've got to do this. What if I can just be walking around? I had the idea of walking around London, just experiencing some anxious feeling, thinking, and it not being something where I go, oh, I need to upload the anxious coping mechanism strategy program sort of thing. And it's, for me, when you're saying it's like the same thing with feelings, with sadness, it's like, well, you've never really actually allowed yourself to feel sadness. So you've never learned how to live with it, to experience it, to see that it does come and go when you don't try and. It's like the thing of like, oh, I'm feeling sad, and it's like, oh, the mind can then play the sadness program, and it's like, well, that can just be on loop forever and ever. Like, it can be on for as long as it wants. Whereas the actual sadness, the energy, the feeling in the body, it sounds like, and it kind of, I can recall examples where it's true for me that it's like when I allowed myself to just cry or feel sad, at some point I didn't feel as sad. I stopped crying, but not because I did anything, but because I just allowed it to kind of be, to kind of work through me, rather than, again, that's where in the past for me it's the just, well, we're just not going to feel that, we'll just bury that down and hope we never have to like look at that again sort of thing, which is where like starting to look at all the feeling thing for me, I've said to you I think yesterday, like it's like it's kind of scary that there's like 25, 30 years of feelings that might be coming up sort of thing. So
yeah, and I think you've nailed it really. Like, that's exactly it, is that when we can allow ourselves to experience sadness, that's what it means, is like it will pass through. It is exactly like the thought thing, except it's feeling. And the difference is that now that you are, or as we, because you know this is the same for me as well, is that like once you've kind of mastered the neck up, then you're like, oh, the rest of you start speaking and you're like, oh shit.
I suppose yeah, that's the thing though, isn't it? It's when I think about it, it's like we go to school and we use our brains.
It's all head based.
Yeah, it's like,
yeah,
because it's like, well, I've definitely heard something like that. We have like 3 brains or something like that, like the gut, like something like that. There's more than one brain, but it's like in the world that we've been brought up in, it's like this brain is the only one that's been told that it was actually a thing, and that it was useful, and that everything was then built around it. So that then it's like natural. Why would then be like, well, it's then kind of going, what do you mean there's other parts of my body which could provide me with useful information? Because I wrote that down. I said it to you. It's like, are feelings useful? It's like, because to me, I've spent my entire life being like, well, feelings seem like either a thing that you really like because they're feelings that you want, and they just like get to feel happy to do. And then there's feelings that are bad, so you don't want them because they're really problematic. And it's actually like I thought then it's like, well, what if sadness is just an acknowledgement of someone passing who you really loved? And it's like, oh, and I've literally just thought of that just then. And it's like, well, that's a very different way of, I suppose, viewing it. And in that way, you could then actually welcome that sadness because it's a different form of a feeling that you could welcome. That it's like, actually, like I'm thinking of, say, at a funeral, rather than just being like, you could be sad, but you could almost be sad and celebratory of someone's life, and it could be a very different experience. You could feel, and then it's almost like, I'm literally doing this as I'm speaking, is that the depths of feeling you could go to so much more because you're allowing yourself to feel. But it's like, then I suppose it's also then on the flip side, it's like, well, yes, you might have been feeling happy, but it's like just like a little shallow
10%.
like, yeah, and it's because you're not really, again, now that I think about it, it's like, well, maybe you're only feeling a little bit happy because actually on some level you're scared to feel really happy, because what if life gets really good and then it's not so good? And it's like,
that's exactly it.
Yeah,
because in avoiding sadness, you could never feel
the depths
happy
of,
more than that,
yeah,
because that comes at risk of feeling even more sad.
mm.
Like, I can't let myself love this person this much, because when something happens, and being human, we know it is always going to be a when,
Yeah,
I can't deal with the level
yeah.
of grief that I will have to
That would have
face.
to come with it. Yeah, yeah. The level of love is equal to the level of grief that you would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same with happiness or joy and sadness.
And that's where it's then, if you can, yeah, I like that reframe about sadness. It's like again, well, I think this is where the exploration then comes in. It's like, well, what is it? Yeah, it's like, what's this feeling trying to tell me, I suppose.
Well, that's going into your brain.
Oh, okay.
Which is fine, you can do that, but but really it's the experience of it in your body. And this is all just opinion, right? You do it how the right way for you. And if that means looking for what's it trying to teach me, then you do that way.
Yeah.
For me, I've found, I was doing that this morning. It was like, rather than experiencing the sensations of mine was like frustration or like irritated or angry, like rather than feel that, I was like, okay, let me jump to what's it trying to show me? Like, okay, what do I need to let go of so that I don't have to? And it's like, no, because all of that's still kind of a way of avoiding feeling the feeling in my body. And so go on.
Would you say it's like, then it's not that it's either or, it's both, but it's what we tend to do is jump to the thinking part of it, rather than like, oh, I felt it for a couple of seconds, now I can jump to the thinking about it, rather than sitting with, I suppose I might answer my own question, but like sitting with the feeling, and then sometimes that might just let it go or process it or do whatever it needs to, or it might be like, no, you've actually sat with it and you've fully allowed that feeling to flower, so to speak. And then at some point, there's this thing, it's you consciously choose to use your mind to look at it rather than default. So it's like, I'm choosing to experience this, feel this, and sit with it. And then maybe at some point, I then ponder about it. But it's like that thing of allowing yourself to fully feel it first, to allow that to be, and then maybe looking at it from a mind-based logical to see what you see, but not just going, oh, I felt something, and now I'll use my brain to kind of not feel it, because actually that's what I suppose that's what I do. It's like, oh, I feel sad. Oh, it's like, well, you feel sad because of this, and that's totally understandable, because this is a situation where you could feel sad, and it's like, this has happened, and and it's kind of using logic to rationalize a feeling rather than feeling it.
Yeah. What I have personally found the differences is, oh yeah, no, that was it. So two things, I think, whatever, we'll see how they come out. One is that the brain, the way that perception works is that the brain is like a stimulus response thing. We think it's that something external has caused me to respond with sadness, but it's arguably it's not that, because it's all an internal thing that's created from your brain. So actually what it's got is it has a default core belief of something. I'm not enough, nobody loves me, nothing I ever do is good enough. Like there's like a series of things that many of us have as pre-programmed core things. Let's say, for example, with the sadness, let's jump a few levels up, but like I feel sad. Like the sadness was already there, and what your brain is then doing by you pondering it is you're looking for the reason why you feel sad, which is what you've just said is what you do, because it's like, well, it makes sense that you're sad because there's this thing that happened, but all of that puts it external world onto you. So it puts the power externally and says the world does these things to me, and I then experience sadness. But actually what's happening, one argument or school of thought maybe, is that there is a core belief or there is a core experience of sadness that then needs to be felt because it's frozen somewhere in your body. And in order to get you to feel it, you or your subconscious has created a reality that stimulates something that makes you feel sad because it wants you to feel it.
And that's the thing. It's as you were talking, I was like, what? So there's sadness in you, and it's like, actually, I get it, because it's that thing of, as you say, it's the childhood experience created some feeling that wasn't processed or dealt with as a child, because you're a child and you don't either know how or not shown or not, it's not whatever, but it gets, as you say, stuck, frozen, whatever, in the body as energy, which again sounds completely woo-woo to me, but it does feel true, because anytime that I look at it, so I look at what I thought was like, I could be really sad that the grass is growing. Like, if there's a belief in the body, like there's a feeling in the body that's stored, the brain can find a way to create a story to get you triggered. And that's where it's like, anything that triggers you, there's something that you haven't processed, is the way that I've been thinking about it. It's like, why is it, and we said this yesterday, like, why is it that red car triggers you? It was just an example for us both, but we were sat in the car park and it's like looking, it's like, well, that red car could trigger someone. If it won't trigger other people, therefore it's not the red car that's triggering people. And it's like, well, as I go backwards, it's then you can then go, like, for me, the thing is like, there's a repeating thing of, oh, I was always alone. So then you then look at your life and you then go, oh, look, you are finding ways to be alone, type thing. And it's then not the current thing that triggered it that you like necessarily need to do, like look at. It's the going back and the energy of the childhood experience. It's like, I think you said, it's like allowing yourself to experience it as that version of you, to allow you to process it, so that then you can then write a different pattern or write a different story, which I think again is, it's very similar to thought-based stuff, and I think that's why I got a bit like, oh, I can't believe I didn't see there's a feelings version of this, if that makes sense.
But that would make sense that you would feel like that, because you also have a narrative that we've spoken about before of I've missed something, or
yeah. Like there's bits where it's, and you've done it various times, where it's like go deeper on that thing, or like, here's how you could, like the whole sitting, like you said, like this body scan type thing. Like I think there's certain bits of it where it's like people, like some people will do certain bits just on their journey, but they won't do other bits. So it's like going, what's the journey look like, because not everyone will know what to do, or they will get stuck at some point, or they won't look at something that would be really useful to look at, sort of thing. It's like I just started writing down on my notes, so I've got like feelings, like these are just categories of notes that I made: feelings, thoughts, questions, events, and then what patterns from childhood might you be repeating out, sort of thing, like as a way to explore it and like kind of note down, so that, but then it's like going like, okay, cool, you've got a list of things that you remember from your childhood, but that doesn't necessarily mean,
that's the other thing I was going to say, was about the brain being the first thing, is that if you go in with the brain first, you'll find an answer that fits.
Yes, yeah.
Whereas when you go and you experience the feeling, and then you can go in with like preferably as open a mind as possible to like, I don't know what's going to be presented or come up, then you get the real thing come up, because you've allowed yourself to feel the things that your logical brain would think are ridiculous.
So
for example,
well, it's like
I want to do that one because that's too personal. Sorry, hang on a sec.
No, go for it.
Give me a different one. Like, for example, if you were experiencing anger, like, and it was about someone cutting you up in traffic, then it's like there's the initial thing of like, well, it's because they cut in front of me. So then we've already got past that point, and we're saying no, actually it's anger was already present, then there's been a situation created from you and your subconscious, even though yes, someone else's behavior.
But that's where it's so interesting, like to go like, well, like think about that situation, like, well, someone cutting you up, do they, every time you get cut up, do you get angry? Like,
yeah, exactly.
Like,
and if that were to happen to someone else, would they react the same? No, because the anger isn't something you can point to. It was an internal experience. That's the same with every emotion, is that originated from you. Like, anger is not something that drives, it's not the one driving the car. Anger is a viscerally, how do you experience anger? Well, my blood pressure increases, I get hot, right, all of that's internal. So when we look at it like that, it's obvious that emotions are an internal thing. And then, but we apply meaning or external stuff to them, right? But it's an internal experience. So if we're saying that the anger was already in you, and then you were to sit with anger and you go, And then it's easy to say, okay, well, I'm angry because this person cut me up, which is the same as what you were saying about the sadness, right? It's like, well, I'm sad. It makes sense that you're sad because of this.
Yeah.
Then what you can also do is go, okay, well, anger's already inside of me. Let me look back to my childhood of the things I consciously remember, of which most people, or a lot of people, I was certainly like this. I don't have a lot of childhood memories because of the traumaticness nature of them, or because I shut down my experience of life. I don't remember a lot of stuff, not even the stuff that was hugely traumatic, just general childhood Kirsty, I don't have much memory of.
Yeah.
Because I was so closed to life in my experience from a safety perspective. Another whole tangent. Then I'll look back and I'll go, okay, well, it makes sense that anger is present in me because my dad was abusive to me as a child, or to my mum, and I felt defensive of my mum and of me and my sister, and so it would make sense that I had anger. And it's like, okay, cool. Does that make it go away? No. What does then go is like, okay, I'm experiencing anger at this particular traffic scenario. Let me go into my body and go, okay, where do I feel it? Okay, I feel it as tightness in my chest. I can feel it now. It's like tightness in my chest that's like the bottom of my rib cage, kind of attached to my diaphragm. And it feels like it's like a stretching and then a contraction. It's like a real fight, it feels like, in my chest. And it feels like warm. And then it's like kind of pulsing. And so if I can allow myself to feel it, I would find that by just feeling it and focusing, every time my brain wants to go somewhere else and look for a memory, I'm going to ignore it and I'm going to pull it back onto the physical sensation. I would then find, and I do think this is the bit that can be helpful to be guided by someone, but like you can, I think, do it yourself, is stay with the feeling, and then either the feeling will like maybe dissipate, it might get worse, it might move. You just stay with the feeling until it kind of levels out, or you get an insight. And the insight or memory that randomly pops up either in the moment of feeling the feeling or later on is probably more likely the one that was actually connected to that experience of anger. But for example, let me give an example of what I meant by it might be an irrational one. It might be that experience of anger, or that flavor of anger, was from when I was 3 and my new baby sister was born, and I hated the fact that, I was actually 2, but like, I'm just giving an example. I hated the fact that she'd been born and she'd been given one of my toys that I didn't want to be taken away from me. Like, that is, as adult Kirsty, that is an irrational thing that I can logically persuade myself I shouldn't feel angry about. But that doesn't stop the fact that 3-year-old Kirsty, who had a toy taken away, felt angry and wasn't able to necessarily process the adult logic of like, well, she's your baby sister, blah 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 blah. Instead, she just wanted to feel angry, and that piece has frozen itself in my chest, and until I can then feel it, that can then now release. And so it's never just like, well, I've dealt with anger. It's like, no, you dealt with like one slither of anger. Does this make sense? Like, it kind of does make sense, but it's like an unfolding thing, ongoing process.
Two things on that. It's like it's not the thing that goes, you can now go, oh well, that's the thing that would create the most anger and make most sense. No. It's
which is what your brain will do, because it only knows it's looking for a solution.
It's like I just
say, well, there isn't actually a problem.
So
it's the brain can't find a solution.
Doesn't even matter if it's true or not. Like, it's like,
exactly.
If that was your experience of it, like, you could go, well, I experienced this, and then you could ask your parents about it. It's like, oh no, that wasn't what happened. Like it was completely different. But if that was your experience of it, that was your experience of it. So it's
But
like, it
also
doesn't.
their experience of it, what they're telling you is what happened, is their experience of it.
Yeah.
So there is no true reality.
Yeah. And that's where it's as you say, it's the not the, oh, I'll sit down and write everything that I can remember and then I'll pick the one that makes the most sense. It's like,
Right.
but that's where I suppose it's that, like, yeah, cool, do that, but then see if the anger's still there, for example. And if it is, then you know that there's still something to look for.
Yeah, and lots of people will convince themselves it's not, but it will be there. It's very likely it will still be there.
To the point of, it can feel like that bit of the thing of like it continually unfolding can feel a bit demoralizing.
Yeah.
A bit like, oh, like, and again, I've already gone on a different perspective, like zoomed out a little bit of like, well, it is just an unfolding journey. It's not that you're going to have to be in that state of always looking all the time. You can still enjoy life, but that's where it's like, it's more, as I think we've said, as things come up, you have the choice to look at them or not look at them. And it's like, it's not that you're always going to be in that state, which that's what feels a bit like, oh, really? Is that just going to be my life of just looking at past childhood trauma for like forever, like all the time? It's like, no.
No.
And I think that's the thing, that the bit of like, I don't know, sadness or like, it's almost like readjusting of going like, oh, okay. And again, going like, oh, okay, there's this cool thing that I get to do that's actually going to help me rewrite the stories rather than keep replaying the stories. Because I think that's the thing that, probably the thing that helps me with the looking at the feelings is, and this isn't just me making it up, but it's making a rational story in my head why it makes sense to look at the feelings, of like going bigger picture. It's like, well, actually, if you look at all, there's that repeating pattern that keeps happening in your life, that you keep creating, that actually you don't want.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, you've tried lots of other things, maybe try this thing, like, and it's like, so I think that's the thing. It's when, I don't know, when, maybe because it's new to me, but it's like when you're in it, it can feel very all encompassing and as if it's like this big, terrible thing, but actually it is helping you, even if you don't necessarily like it or see it in the moment, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And I think everybody goes through that stage.
Like
and
a grieving or something, I don't know of.
Well, because it does make sense. Because if you think that like everything we're saying about the need to do this is because feeling your feelings means, or our brains have equated it with pain. The very reason that we are numb is is because our body and everything about us has decided to cut off the emotion and feeling because it was too painful. So why would it be easy?
Yeah.
Why would you rationally want to go there?
Yeah.
You don't. Everything about your system is going to kick up a fight to stop you wanting to feel it.
So then, playing devil's advocate, why do you look?
Because there's something in me that desires freedom from the patterns, or I don't want to keep doing it. That was why I started the journey. It was like, I knew there was something in me that was saying, you haven't gone there yet. This isn't enough. Like, I'd read all the self-help books. I'd done all the courses. I'd trained as a coach in a lot of the stuff that I thought was the stuff that would make my life better. And yet my inner world, I knew that there was stuff I was missing. And so I knew that I felt disconnected from my body, because some of the other stuff I'd tried to kind of get into, like, for example, people like women talking about like womb wisdom or like connection with your body, I was like, yeah, I don't really like, it's just my body. I'm not really that fussed about it. Like, actually, the only way I deal with my body is whether I think it looks good or flabby. That was literally it. Rather than actually going, well, hang on, everyone's talking about this body wisdom. I haven't really considered that. Is that a thing? It was like an experiment.
Yeah.
And then the more that I kind of allowed the option of maybe I don't know everything, and maybe the self-help books aren't the answer, I still was looking for the answer. And it's not that the body-based stuff is the answer, because what I realized through the body-based stuff is there is no the answer.
Yeah, it's a piece of the puzzle type.
It's like, yeah, because there's nothing wrong with me. And that's what doing the body-based stuff, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm exactly as I'm meant to be. Like,
so you said the word experiment, and that kind of, I was like, because I've just been watching Tim Ferriss interview, and like he basically does lots of experiments, and it's like in the same way that he's experimenting, I think, with like psychedelics, like experiment with feeling your feelings.
I just think life is meant to be a big experiment. And I think the biggest thing we can do, the thing is, if people are like, whether we put this out or we don't put this out, but if people listen to stuff like this, they already know that they haven't gone fully there. They already know they're seeking a freedom or a level of freedom, internal freedom, that they haven't yet found.
Yeah.
Because otherwise they wouldn't be looking. Like, the only people that you and I are talking to that would engage with us or our stuff that we're saying are already seekers, like, of something different. They're the only ones that are going to kind of sit through this kind of stuff. Is already at least a question mark in their mind of, is this it?
Yeah. And I think, as you kind of said, it's like you can hold two things that you said. You can be seeking and know that you're okay at the same time, type thing as well.
Yeah.
Like,
and
that's for me, that like polar opposite thing of, that's what maybe allows you to live your life.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I am okay, and part of my life is the exploration, is the experiments, is seeking, is knowing that there's something for me to look at. It's not that I'll live my life when I'm fixed. It's
no, because you don't ever need fixing, because there's nothing wrong with you. That's the thing I think that I found liberating, was like, rather than, and that's the thing, I think there's this thing of like, especially with emotional stuff, I've had a few people, and it has been actually men, I don't know if there's something in that, but it has been a theme with men I've spoken to, of, doesn't it get exhausting, or like, I thought I was kind of done with feeling your feelings, like there's this idea that it would be draining and it would be too much. And what I would say to that is, like, back to what we were saying earlier, or what you said earlier about, it's on a spectrum. So if I want to feel higher levels of joy and happiness and abundance and like all these other high vibration or whatever, I don't like labeling things, but like, just for the sake of general people, like those ones, love, whatever, then I know that if I feel more of that, I'm going to have to feel more grief. Then I'm willing to do it because I want the experience of more. Like, I want a fuller, richer life experience. And that is going to have to include more love. And if I want to feel more of that, I know I've got to feel more of this. Then actually what I've found anyway is, yes, the initial bits of feeling into my body and seeing what was there and dealing with what came up, for me, it was heavy and like a bit niggly and gnarly and all of that, but it is now easier and quicker. And so like the stuff this morning, sorry, but just like the stuff that came up for me this morning, rather than it feeling like I'm angry, it was like, I'm feeling something in my body as energy. So it's a bit like, I've used this with you before, I think, of like, my muscles being sore from a gym,
Yeah.
it becomes the same feeling. It's like I can feel something in my body. I don't actually need to label it. So then but I will write down whatever thoughts are present, because I trust that all of it is for a reason. So I just write it all out, or I process it. However, I went on a walk, more came through, and I could feel more unlocking in different areas of my body, or like, I say unlocking, but like how I actually experience that, for people who aren't familiar with that phrase, or who get turned off by phrases like that, which is completely understandable. It was like buzzing and tightness in my throat, which then moved into my chest as like a tightness and a stretching, which I then felt move like as like into my diaphragm. I had a sudden pain in one side, and then it was like into my hips, and then my legs, and then it was gone. Like that is, and actually the thoughts and the memories that it then unlocked, which was bizarre but made complete sense afterwards, were arguably big things, like big themes for me. But they didn't feel drastic.
Do you find that those things come after you've, like, because that sounds like you process the energy, and because the energy wasn't there, it wasn't blocking you from seeing something.
Do you know what? Because rather than trying to hold onto it and like understand it and look at it as like, you know how when kids, they'll collect a bug and they put it under a thing, it's like, well, the bug is still trapped, right? They're like looking at it and you're like, oh, I can now understand this bug. And it's like, well, you can understand and look at the bug from an external perspective, from within a trapped glass. Like, you're not actually understanding how the bug lives. You're looking at specific features of it. I don't know why this analogy is coming up, but whatever. Whereas if you were to observe the bug in nature and kind of let it move, you would learn actually a lot more about it. Because you're actually experiencing it as a thing, rather than looking at it within a confined environment. So with the feelings, it was like, because I wasn't attached to like, so how we started this call, and I said to you, it's really easy for me to be like, okay, well, I need the whole day. I've written the whole day off straight away because I'm experiencing something that feels heavy. Like I can feel that it's a lot. And so I'm going to block out the whole rest of my day. I'm going to not do these things. And that made me more cross, because I was like, well, now I've got to spend my whole day looking at this thing. And it's like, well, I could have done that. Instead, I didn't do that, because by not doing that, instead, if I'd done that, I'd have been the equivalent of putting it in the glass jar to look at it. I'm holding onto it. There's a clinging to it. There's a labeling. There's a like, okay, well, this is mine. This belongs to me. This is something to do with me. And I did start there. I was like, okay, well, it makes sense because I'm annoyed at this person, and this person really like hurt me in the past, and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, actually, let me just let go of that. And then the things that came up was like people that I had forgotten about. It came up that the feelings in my body, the energy, randomly popped up them. And I was like, where's that coming from? That's completely left field. But it was when I allowed that was what then actually moved it.
Right.
Whereas otherwise, I didn't even remember these people. That's what was weird. It was like, and literally the other day, I'd had the thought of, I can't remember that woman's name. But anyway, you know, so that's the thought that came, was like, this woman who played a particular role in my life. I was like, isn't it weird? I can't even remember her name, because she played such a big role in my story, but I can't even remember her name. And I couldn't remember hardly anything about her. And yet, and that came up the other day randomly. And then I left it and just let it kind of pass by, as you do, like with the thoughts and stuff. And then literally today, feeling into something else that connected to someone else, that connected to like a completely different part of my story. I then had this absolute like moment of clarity where I went, oh, that was this other woman's name, was the same name as this person who's pissed me off in a very similar way. Isn't that really interesting?
Yeah.
And then that was like, boom. And then I remembered, like, it made sense why I would block that off. There were lots of confusing feelings. yeah, so like, long story short, but I think there is something in trusting yourself, to trusting your intuition to take you and your into your subconscious, where the actual wound or the actual memory is. And the main thing I think to really try and clarify is the difference between my version this morning of like, okay, I'm feeling angry, let me block out the whole day, let me do the, you know, this is right, fine, is there's loads of drama there. I'd be a proper drama queen. And that's the thing, is then the different, and it's the drama that creates the suffering. You've got a really good post in there about suffering.
Which one's that?
Absent something of two apiece.
Oh, what peace? Well, there's peace is independent of your preferences, but
no,
not...
there's something to do with suffering anyway.
Oh,
but anyway, I can't think of it right now. It'll come to me in a minute. Is that like, oh, it's John's one. Something about suffering is like the clinging on, or the human condition, or something about clinging to it.
The resistance to being human.
Maybe it's not that. I can't remember which one. There's a different one. Anyway,
there's a lot of post-it notes to remember.
Yeah, there's a lot. But the point is that the drama is the thing that's the suffering, and that's what extends the process. When you can experience it as emotion, as energy in motion, it continues to move. When you initially are trying to go in, it's like a river, right? So this is how I like to think of it, is if we think of us as a river of constantly flowing energy, you could think of water, right? Just think of yourself like a river. Essentially what it is that from all of these childhood things that happened, and then the story that's evolved since, you know that game Kerplunk, where it's got like all the twigs, the sticks that you got to pull them out? That's what's happening, right? So it's like, you are just, all of us are just shoved with little sticks that are in the way, blocking the flow. You can then experience life still, but it's going to be a restricted version. Whereas actually then what we're doing by feeling the stuff and actually allowing the energy to move is you're taking a stick that's maybe like, oh, I've got a sore, I forever have had a sore right shoulder, right? That was one of the things that moved this morning. And it's like, right, okay, so I'm being drawn towards my right shoulder. Let me look at that, process it emotionally as and when it comes up. I'm not going to do it on purpose, but when it presents itself, it's ready to come up. Okay, cool. That's a stick that now the stick dissolves, and all of a sudden there is a shift. The energy can now move, because the moment in time where that froze, which was connected to something in my experience, is gone, because I've actually allowed myself to experience the thing that caused the block. And so then that's what we're saying, is the more of those sticks that you start to remove, the more the energy starts to move, which inevitably also means you will feel the sticks that are left more because there's more energy to be felt. So it can be that some of them are a lot heavier, and some of them are a log, and some of them are a tiny twig. But like, it becomes, once you've taken one out, you can never go back, because there's, and you will experience the improved level of freedom in your body, and therefore your experience of life, that will then mean that you want to keep doing it. But the first few are going to feel really heavy, potentially.
And I think that's the thing, all of that's probably a good point to kind of bring it to a bit of an end at some point. But like, it's the same experience I had with the thoughts. That's the same thing that you said with the gym thing. It's like, often people, whether it's the gym or whatever form of exercise, the first few times of going feels really challenging and difficult, and you probably feel a lot of like if you go to the gym, your muscles will be really sore afterwards. But then in time, it gets easier and easier. But you then also start to appreciate the sore muscles, because you're like, oh, this is just me seeing through something. In the same way, when I was doing more the thought-based stuff, it was like, oh, I'm getting all up in my head. And like you said, there'd be times where I'd be like, well, I'm going to write off today and like just do nothing, because I need that space. And that then got shorter and shorter. It got easier. But then you then go, oh, cool, I get to look at this. And it doesn't mean that you always have that experience, but it's that you keep wanting to look because you know that there's something more. And it's like the same with, you said about like, as there's fewer sticks left, it's the same with the kind of mind stuff. It's like you notice like the way that like John talked about it is that there's misunderstandings about life. You have stories about how you think life works.
Yeah.
You see through one of those misunderstandings. You go, oh, cool. Life now looks like, feels better. Like it's more enjoyable, or it's improved in some way in your view. So you go, well, I want to pull another one. And as you say, sometimes you pull at one, whether it's and this I think applies for both. Like you pull at one, but as you say, it's actually a massive tree trunk. And you're like, oh no, not right now. And
Not ready
like,
for that one. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's one of those where it goes from this thing, and it's why it's probably really helpful for me to see this, is that it goes from this thing of being like, oh, this is really heavy. Is this going to be this heavy every single time? Do I have to always be doing this? To no, it becomes like a playful exploration where, yes, sometimes it's uncomfortable, sometimes it's heavy, but it becomes something that you get to do. And I think that's where and as you said earlier, like just us talking about this helps me then see things like that it's like, oh, you get to choose whether you look or not. So if I don't want to look today, cool.
Yeah, at least
like,
you've chosen.
Yeah, and it's choosing it, and then it's like, but then there'll be times where it's like, oh, actually, like, and then again, it's one of those where you go, oh, actually, I didn't look yesterday because I was scared, and I just numbed myself for the whole day by working or doing whatever choice of numbing or whatever thing to distract yourself, which again is also totally okay. But it's one of those where even just that process of noticing that then helps you maybe do something different the next time. Like, and it's just that, as you say, when you said unfolding earlier, it was like unfolding like forever, and just like now it's like a lighter unfolding of like, and seeing it differently unfolding for you rather than to you, sort of thing.
That's it, because it's like, actually, exactly as you've just said, what you're essentially saying, or like the energy of it is, this is what people mean when they say take responsibility for your experience, is that's what they mean. Is like, it's not saying that the things that happened to you weren't horrible or weren't whatever, but the point of this, all of this work, inner work or whatever you call it, is to give you your power back. It's to give you the sense of agency, because it's you're trusting that stuff's coming up for you.
Yeah.
And then you now have the choice to go, actually, you know what, I am willing to look at this. I know that this is probably going to be uncomfortable, but I also know that on the other side of uncomfortable is more freedom in my experience, and more joy and more pleasure and more of all the things I want in my life. Why would I
not do that?
Why would I not do that?
Yeah,
exactly.
And it's a snowball effect as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
As well. So
yeah, exactly. It becomes, and I think that's the thing, is the thing is knowing, I think the thing that's really comforting to people is knowing that it's okay to be nervous or anxious or scared the first time, or the first few times, or even later on at any point. It's very normal and perfectly understandable and logical and rational, based on the setup of a human being, to experience fear as you start to look at these things, because it is going to change how you experience yourself and the world, which is scary to the structure of, people call it the ego, or they call it your sense of self. Like, you are questioning everything, and that's terrifying to a system that runs on knowing everything. Because that's what the brain and body does, predicts. It's like, creates predictability, because that's what keeps you safe. But at some point, predictability becomes, or safety becomes, stuck.